Hi, welcome to another edition of the Alan Rosenberg Show. If you know my channel, the month of January is dedicated to Time Capsule. And that's when I do one video for every year. And what I do is I show you a large selection of albums that I have that came out in a particular year. And then at the end of the video, I rank the top 10 and end it with my favorite album of that year. When I started my channel in 2021, I decided to start with the year 1971, and I do it, going back 50 years, basically. And then I do it in 10-year increments. So that first year I did 71, 81, 91, 2001, 2011, and then the next year was 2022. I did 72, 82, 92, 2002, 2012. You get the idea. Now we are January of 2025, and the idea was to start with 1975 and do 85, 95, 2005, and 2015. Today I got an interesting message, comment from Paul, who hasn't watched my videos in a while, but he's a dedicated fan of Time Capsule and loves the series, and he comments and shows his favorites, and he says, Alan, I want you to do me a favor. I don't want you to start with 1975. I know you're going to do that. He says, I want you to start with 1965 because rock and roll was really starting out. Yeah, I guess you can say 64, but 65 had a good amount of classic rock albums. You probably have some. So start with 65. Move it up 10 years. So you know what? This channel is a community. I pride myself on that. I love your comments. I take your advice. So this is going to be the first video of this year, celebrating 2025. But instead of going back 50 years, we're going to start at going back 60 years. And this video is going to be for 1965. Now, this is going to be the lamest video of them. And the reason why is the whole purpose of Time Capsule is to review rock and roll's history year by year, but also, of course, to show you large chunks of my collection. And by doing it year by year. Albums that came out in 1965, my biggest concern was, do I have that many albums that came out in 1965? The reality is I only have like 25 or so. But I'm not even going to rank them. I'm just going to show you the albums that I have that I like that came out in 1965. Then we'll move along. The next video will be 1975. That's when we pick up some numbers. As of right now, I have over 125 or so albums that came out in 75. Give you an idea, it gets large. 1995 has like 140 albums, so I don't show all of them. I show a lot of them. But this one will be easy because I'm only going to show you like about 25 albums, I think, that came out in 1965. We're going to do them in alphabetical order. So, let's do it. Well, actually, let's start with this one. Let's start with vinyl. This is an album that I love. Always did. Love the cover, of course. But this is Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass and the legendary album Whipped Cream and Other Delights. I love this. So I actually discovered Herb Alpert by the 45, and I still have it to this day, of Casino Royale, whatever year that came out. Then eventually I picked up this album. Obviously, I was only 2 years old in 1965. But this is really good stuff. It's actually still got the price tag on there. Anyway, Herb Alpert. Let's stick you up there because that came out in 1965. And I hope you guys don't fall. Now, another one I got a couple of years ago. I've been getting more and more into jazz. This is pretty good. And this is a thing called Choice, the best of Ramsey Lewis Trio. Been expanding my jazz knowledge and horizons, and I guess this is the best of the Ramsey Lewis Trio. And I kind of like it, so we're going to stick you up there as well. Let's do that. But I'd rather look at Herb Alpert, so we'll stick you on top. That might be better. All right, let us continue. And hope we don't have a major collapse. Let's go now in alphabetical order. The Byrds put out 2 classic albums. And there they are. We got Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn, Turn, Turn. These are great legacy versions from Columbia. So they always have bonus tracks. and I am a fan of the Byrds. So this is 2 classic albums that came out from the Byrds. Again, Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn, Turn, Turn. And we will stick you over there. All right, let us continue. Next up, legendary jazz album. When I started getting into jazz, they were like, you got to get this album. And I became a pretty good fan of John Coltrane. This is A Love Supreme. And it's a nice version of it on Impulse on CD. Right there. There is A Love Supreme by John Coltrane. Came out in 1965 as well. Bob Dylan. I just saw the movie. Thought it was absolutely incredible, and I'm not even a fan of biopics, but this one was something special. And of course, that movie ends at this time period, 1965 with Bob Dylan. You got 2 of his greatest albums for sure, Bringing It All Back Home and Highway 61 Revisited. There is the track listing. There's Bringing It All Back Home. I mean, this is just incredible. Gotta love that. And then you get into Dylan going electric, which is how the movie ends, the big conflict there. And there's Highway 61 Revisited, opening up with Like a Rolling Stone. Rock and roll doesn't get any more powerful and better than these 2 Bob Dylan albums. Obviously, you don't even need me to say that, right? That's just a fact. All right, let's keep going. Sorry for the dog barking. Marianne Faithfull and her album, self-titled Marianne Faithfull from 1965. This is a really cool version on CD with lots and lots of bonus tracks. But she was so sweet. Not only sweet looking, but she had such a cool, pretty voice. And then obviously that changed drastically over the years. And I have been a fan of Marianne Faithfull her whole career. When she came back with Broken English, it's like a whole different person. But that first Marianne Faithfull album from 1965, pretty amazing. This is one, I got another jazz album that came out in 65 that I got recently over the last couple of years. Herbie Hancock and Maiden Voyage. A really excellent jazz album. And this also was from 1965. Let's keep going. We're going to go to B.B. King and the album Live at the Regal. Right there. And this is Live at the Regal, legendary B.B. King live album. And he's got a couple, but this is a really famous one. And I love this one. This is a great, great live album. Okay. Now we get into my favorite bands. The Kinks. They put out 2 albums in 1965. And one is Kinda Kinks, right there. And I got a deluxe edition and this version. And this version also has loads of bonus tracks. But if you really want to get lots of bonus tracks, you get this deluxe edition. And that's got 2 CDs with tons of stuff. So this is Kinda Kinks from the Kinks, obviously. Not one of my favorite Kinks albums, but really good. And we will stick that one over there. We'll stick this over there. It's kind of big. And then the King Controversy, which is, this is the deluxe edition of that with 2 discs. And they would only get better. You know, these are fine albums. Always have a couple of really good songs on there, legendary songs. But far from perfect albums. But obviously, as a huge Kinks fan, I love them. This is an album that's kind of forgotten. Even a band that's kind of forgotten. But the Love and Spoonful back in 1965 put out Do You Believe in Magic? Everybody knows that song, but it's actually a pretty fine record all the way through. Younger Girl. Did you ever have to make up your mind? But obviously the classic is Do You Believe in Magic? Paul Simon. Well, he put out the Paul Simon Songbook. This is before Simon and Garfunkel. It's an interesting album that would only get improved upon later on with Simon and Garfunkel and Paul Simon's solo career. But this is a cool one if you've never heard that, the Paul Simon Songbook. And I got two from the Yardbirds. We got Having a Rave Up. That came out in '65, as did For Your Love. And these are two legendary Yardbird records. I love these versions. I have these deluxe editions imported with tons of bonus tracks. And this is obviously great classic stuff, the Yardbirds. And this is For Your Love. Right there. That's going to be the end of Eric Clapton and the Yardbirds after that. Didn't want to be so commercial, he always said. So let's stick that over there. And then, of course, the big question you're saying, well, it's 1965, where are the Beatles and where are the Rolling Stones? And we had to save them for last because really, frankly, you know, their stuff was, you know, they're the best stuff, in my opinion, out of what I'm showing you, that of what I have anyway. So, but their catalogs get so messy because there is the UK overseas albums and then you got the United States albums, and they don't match. So it gets kind of messy. You know, if you look at the Beatles, well, in the United States they have the early Beatles. Right, let me get closer here. You got the early Beatles, and there's the track listing. You see that? And, you know, it's an interesting compilation. Is it essential? No, you got Beatles 6 came out in '65. These are the U.S. albums, so you people overseas, you probably don't even know these albums, and you're really not missing that much because the UK ones are really the great ones. The classics help. So here's the U.S. version, and this is the original motion picture soundtrack, which is very different than the Help album, which is this one, which of course is phenomenal. Now this is, I have the mono, this is mono. It gets really, it gets like, what do you call that overseas? Train spotting? I mean, I got so many versions of this stuff. I got mono, I got US, I got UK. People say you don't like the Beatles album. I never talked about the Beatles. I have all the Beatles albums, but I just don't listen to them all that much. But here is Help. Now, I got to say, I love this album. In fact, this Beatles album right here is very much near the top of my all-time favorite Beatles albums. There's other people who also love Help as much as me. The movie's really silly. It's like a Bad Monkeys episode, but the music is, love this. The Night Before, Help, this is just great. And of course they released Rubber Soul, and here is mono version, and then this is the stereo version, and we'll flip them over. And Rubber Soul is also amazing. This would also be way up there. In fact, Help and Rubber Soul would be way up there as far as my two favorite Beatles albums. They just still sound so great. Great stuff, obviously. Here's a U.S. version of Rubber Soul as well. So the Beatles, you know, does it get any better than Rubber Soul and Help? Probably not. It probably would be the two best albums of the year. But when I do my rankings, I always based on actual play, the albums that I listen to the most. And for me, I'm just such a Rolling Stones fan that I tend to listen to the Rolling Stones albums that came out the most. So even in 1965, overseas they released number 2, and this is their second album. Now it's interesting, in the U.S. they did 12 by 5, which was their second U.S. album. That came out in '64, but this came out in January of '65, the Stones' second album. Their catalog is equally messy because the U.S. and the U.K. stuff is it gets really messy. Rolling Stones Now, the classic album, not amongst my top favorite Stones albums, but really good for sure. Then I get into Out of Our Heads. That becomes, you know, a really all-time favorite Stones album. But you get the UK, I got a mono version, I got a US version, I got mono, I got stereo. But if you want to look, oh, I didn't even bring up my stereo versions. I should have done that. This is mono. These are mono. There's a UK and there's a US. They got different covers. Oh, this is the UK. This is the US. This looks familiar because the Stones put it on December's Children, which was a US only release. I love December's Children, and I love Out of Our Heads. These are two amazing records. And speaking of records, let's show you them. So here on vinyl, it's the Stones Now stereo version. And then we got Out of Our Heads, US version, stereo. Love this album. It's the one that's got Satisfaction on it, of course. And December's Children, which a lot of people kind of consider a throwaway, but I love December's Children. It's got Get Off of My Cloud, I'm Free, As Tears Go By, Gotta Get Away, Blue Turns to Gray, You Better Move On, Singing Out the Song, She Said Yeah. For a lot of people, they consider that album kind of a throwaway, but not me. I love it. So those two, December's Children, Out of Our Head, for me, would be my two favorite albums that came out in 1965, along with Bringing It All Back Home, Highway 61 Revisited, and the two of my favorite Beatles albums, which is Rubber Soul and Help. Pretty great stuff in 1965. So there you have it. What I'm showing you right here. My selections for my biggest albums, the ones that I own, that came out in 1965. A special edition here of Time Capsule. After this, the next video will be where it would normally have started in 1975. So, Paul, hope this made you happy. Starting in the 60s now instead of the 70s. But you definitely have a great point. The 60s, the latter stage 60s stuff is amazing. So I'm kind of curious myself. So we're starting here in 65. Next video is going to be 1975. And like I said, I got like 125 albums that came out that year. We'll do 1985, 1995, 2005, and 2015. And all of these videos are going to be in the month of January as we do the Alan Rosenberg Show Time Capsule. Now, there is a whole playlist of Time Capsule where you can go here to Time Capsule favorite album by year, and there is a video of each year. So you can choose them, and it can get pretty involved because I can show a lot of records and then end it with my top 10 and my favorite of the year. It's a great series. I think it was really the main reason why I started my channel, to show my collection, do it year by year, and it becomes my history of rock and roll. So hope you enjoyed this. Stick with this series. It's going to be throughout the month of January. That's how I always start the new year off. That's about it. I'm wearing a Jets hat in dedication to my friend Mike in California, who's been a dedicated Jets fan his whole life and been getting tortured by them. But I think today should be their last game, I guess, although I think they have one more win than the Giants, so that's something. Personally, I have not been a football fan, a Jets fan, since around the early 70s when they had Joe Namath and Emerson Boozer, who else? John Riggins, Don Maynard, Al Whittle. There you go. Living in the past, that's me. Alrighty, guys, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time on the Alan Rosenberg Show.